You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to episode number 483 of our Civil War podcast. My name is Rich.
And I'm Tracy. Hello y'all, welcome to the podcast. As y'all will recall, when we left off last time, it was Friday, May 6th, 1864 in the Wilderness, and Lee's old war horse, Lieutenant General James Longstreet, was hoping to launch a surprise attack on the left flank of the Federal Army.
We said that Robert E. Lee's chief engineer, Major General Martin L. Smith, had been sent out to scout the ground south of the Plank Road, and when Smith returned from his reconnaissance around 10 a.m., he reported to Longstreet that he'd found an unfinished railroad bed just south of the Orange Plank Road that offered an unguarded path to the enemy left flank.
Longstreet summoned his chief of staff, 26-year-old G. Moxley Sorrell, and told him, "Colonel, there is a fine chance of a great attack on our right." Then, as he waved his arm to the south, Longstreet said, "If you will quickly get into those woods, some brigades will be found much scattered from the fight. Collect them and take charge."
"Hit them hard," Longstreet continued, "but not until you have everything ready." Old Pete said he would be listening for the sounds of battle to the south that signaled the start of Sorrell's assault on the Federal left, and then he, Longstreet, would order the rebel troops astride the Plank Road to attack as well.
Within an hour, Sorrell had organized an ad hoc division composed of 4 brigades and sent them hustling down the railroad bed. Although he was a staff officer, Sorrell not only led them into position, but seems to have led them into action as well.
His surprise attack struck the Yankees not on the Brock Road, where Federal Second Corps Commander Winfield Scott Hancock was expecting to be hit, but squarely on the Union left flank, about midway between the Brock Road and the Tapp Farm. The Federals were thus caught facing west, as the Confederates came boiling up from the south. And although the Yankees tried to wheel to meet the unexpected threat, they couldn't do so in time.
2 brigades of Federals on Hancock's extreme left broke to the rear. Their collapse, in turn, exposed the brigades to the north, closer to the Plank Road, who also ran.
Fatigue as well as surprise played a role in the debacle. One Federal soldier admitted, quote, "There was no chance for us when the left gave away, but to run or to be taken prisoner. I was shamelessly demoralized. I didn't know where my regiment had gone to, and to be candid about it, I didn't care. I was tired almost to death and as hungry as a wolf. My patriotism was well nigh used up till I had some refreshments."
From imminent triumph 5 hours earlier, Hancock now passed abruptly to ignominious defeat. He admitted that Longstreet's flank attack, quote, "rolled me up like a wet blanket."
Simultaneously, the rest of Longstreet's corps attacked from the front, ensuring the Confederate victory. Hancock's men fled toward the crucial Brock Road-Orange Plank Road intersection. Some ran panic-stricken, but most, after clearing the battlefield, dropped to a sullen, deliberate walk. Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Lyman, the staff officer from Meade's headquarters, recalled, quote, "They were not running, nor scared, nor had they thrown away their guns. They had fought all they meant to fight for the present, and there was an end of it."
Lyman tried to rally these tired, disheartened men, but to no avail. Quote, "I drew my sword and rode in among them. I would get one squad to stop, but as I turned to another, the first would quietly walk off."
The Federal soldiers kept going until they reached the line of field works at the Brock Road intersection, and there they stopped and allowed themselves to be rallied. Officers called out the names of regiments, while color bearers planted their flags prominently on top of the works as rallying points. It took perhaps 30 minutes or a bit more, but finally the troops were reorganized. Hancock rode along the line and told the men they had to hold at this spot at all hazards.
The Federals received an unexpected reprieve when the enemy pressure abruptly eased off after James Longstreet was shot and severely wounded by Confederate soldiers just 4 miles from where Stonewall Jackson had been hit by friendly fire here in the Wilderness almost exactly a year earlier.
You see, Longstreet, wanting to keep up the pressure and finish off the Yankees, was riding with a large party of aides and other officers down the Orange Plank Road when Confederate soldiers from the 12th Virginia mistook the riders for Federals and opened fire. The flurry of shots killed Brigade Commander Micah Jenkins, a staff officer, and a courier. James Longstreet was hit in the shoulder. The bullet, upon exiting his shoulder, gashed his neck. As he reeled in the saddle, with blood pouring from multiple injuries, his horrified aides thought he was surely mortally wounded. However, a surgeon was able to stop the bleeding and pronounced the general's injuries were, quote, "not necessarily fatal."
Nevertheless, Longstreet was quite seriously wounded, and as it turned out, he would be knocked out of action for months. He wouldn't rejoin the Army until October 1864, and even then it was obvious he wasn't fully recovered.
After Longstreet's wounding, it took time for Robert E. Lee to take charge of Old Pete's Corps and get a grasp of the situation. So not until after 4 p.m. did Lee resume the offensive, this time with a frontal assault on Hancock's Federals, in the hopes that a solid push would rout the Yankees out of their defensive works around the Brock Road intersection.
But Lee's gamble failed. At 1 or 2 spots, the attacking Confederates managed to pierce the Federal defenses, but nowhere was there a breakthrough, and the rebels who made it inside the Union works were soon forced to retreat in the face of withering musket and cannon fire.
Longstreet's artillery chief, Brigadier General E. Porter Alexander's scathing assessment was that, quote, "This attack ought never to have been made. It was wasting good soldiers whom we could not spare." After that failed Confederate strike against the Brock Road intersection, the Battle of the Wilderness was nearly at an end. A Federal attack scheduled for 6 p.m. was canceled when Hancock, who was supposed to have made it, reported that his troops were exhausted and low on ammunition after repulsing Lee's assault. However, the Confederates made one final offensive stab to the north when, at sunset, 3 brigades led by Brigadier General John B. Gordon struck the end of Sedgwick's line above the Orange Turnpike.
The Confederate flank attack evolved over the course of the day, stemming from the orders that Robert E. Lee had given Dick Ewell for May 6th. Those orders called for Ewell to cut the Federals off from Germanna-Plank Road and the Rapidan fords to the north, if it could be done, quote, without too great a sacrifice.
The brigade on the extreme Confederate left, or northern flank, belonged to John B. Gordon, and so any such attack would involve him. Gordon's troops had earlier fought in the Saunders Field area. In fact, it was his men who routed the Iron Brigade. But after midnight on May 5th, his brigade was shifted north to the extreme left of the Confederate line, next to the brigade of Brigadier General John Pegram.
After reaching his new position, Gordon wanted to know what enemy forces he was facing there, so he sent out scouts who reported that there were no Federals in front of Gordon. The scouts said the Yankee line didn't extend that far north, but instead ended opposite Pegram.
In addition, from the 1st North Carolina Cavalry patrolling beyond Ewell's left flank in the direction of the Rapidan, Gordon got the impression that the Federals had left Germanna Ford unguarded. All of this seemed too good to be true, so Gordon sent his scouts out again to verify the information. But they confirmed that the Federal right flank was indeed up in the air. Then Gordon went forward himself, accompanied only by a 1st North Carolina Cavalry trooper. He later wrote, "We were soon in earshot of a merry clatter of voices. A few feet nearer, and I was shown the end of General Grant's temporary breastworks. There was no line guarding the flank. As far as my eye could reach, the Union soldiers were seated on the margin of their rifle pits, taking their breakfast. Small fires were burning, over which they were boiling their coffee, while their guns leaned against the works in the immediate front."
Having seen for himself that the extreme right or northern end of the Federal line was up in the air, Gordon set about persuading his superiors to adopt his plan, which was simple. He would hit the northernmost enemy brigade, smash it, then charge south, rolling up the Federal line as he went. Meanwhile, the rest of Ewell's troops, up and down the line, would be making a demonstration, ready to join the assault as the Yankees to their front gave way before the steady advance of Gordon's flank attack.
Gordon sent an aide to find Major General Jubal Early, his division commander, to brief him on the opportunity and the plan. However, the aide happened to come across Dick Ewell and began briefing him instead. Ewell listened, and one of his staff officers judged the corps commander was leaning toward giving Gordon's plan the green light. But then Jubal Early rode up, and once he was brought up to speed, he strongly opposed Gordon's idea.
Old Jube marshaled his objections in the crisp, incisive style of the attorney he had once been. He pointed out that Gordon's brigade was too weak to do the job. In addition, the most recent intelligence reports placed Burnside's Federals behind Sedgwick, which, if true, meant that Gordon's flank attack would actually be in danger of being outflanked.
There had also been reports, Early said, of Federals north of Gordon's position and west of the Germanna-Plank Road, and those Yankees might slip into Gordon's rear. To seal his argument, Old Jube pointed out that a serious reversal now would undo Ewell's success up to this point on the northern part of the battlefield around the Orange Turnpike and at Saunders Field.
John B. Gordon then tried to sell his plan in person, but Dick Ewell had been swayed by Early's objections, and he told Gordon there wouldn't be a flank attack, at least until the situation became clearer.
And as the day went on, the situation did become clearer. First, at around 1 o'clock that afternoon, Brigadier General Robert D. Johnston's brigade of Confederates arrived from Taylorsville, where it had been guarding the Hanover Junction area. Placed next to Gordon's brigade, it extended the rebel left flank that much farther to the north, beyond the end of the Federal line.
Then the supposed enemy threat west of the Germanna-Plank Road disappeared, and in addition, by that afternoon, Burnside's Federals were confirmed to be down on Longstreet's part of the battlefield, and thus far removed from Sedgwick's sector.
And so, around sunset, Gordon was given the green light for his attack. He had 3 brigades with him now, his own and Johnston's, and a 3rd brigade under Colonel John S. Hoffman. Gordon's force numbered about 4,000 men in all, and they now moved quietly into a field that Gordon had discovered during his morning reconnaissance, which offered a good spot to deploy into line of battle.
In front of the Confederates lay 2 unsuspecting Federal brigades, commanded by Brigadier Generals Truman Seymour and Alexander Shaler. These troops had borne much of the burden of Sedgwick's tentative attacks on the Confederate line that morning. After 2 days of seemingly pointless fighting, they were tired and their morale was low.
Some had just finished a burial detail. Others were huddled around cooking fires. There was a skirmish line out front, of course, and the skirmishers sent back word that the rebels were up to something out there in the woods. But the day was coming to a close, and nobody paid much attention to such reports.
Suddenly, the quiet of the woodlands was shattered by a tremendous crash of musketry and the howling of the rebel yell. The Federal skirmishers came racing through the bivouac and disappeared into the thickets to the rear. Right on their heels were hundreds of hard-charging Confederates.
All you need is a few minutes to start your day off with something historic when you listen to the This Day in History podcast. Every day there's a new episode for you to listen and learn about what happened that day way back when. Today could be the day a famous mobster met their end, or the first milestone for humans in space. Who knows what history today holds? Find out when you listen and subscribe to This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts. That's This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts.
Want to learn how you can make smarter decisions with your money? Well, I've got the podcast for you. I'm Sean Piles, and I host NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. On our show, we help listeners like you make the most of your finances. I sit down with NerdWallet's team of nerds, personal finance experts in credit cards, banking, investing, and more. We answer your real-world money questions and break down the latest personal finance news. The nerds will give you the clarity you need by cutting through the clutter and misinformation in today's world of personal finance. We don't promote get-rich-quick schemes or hype unrealistic side hustles. Instead, we offer practical knowledge that you can apply in your everyday life. You'll learn about strategies to help you build your wealth, invest wisely, shop for financial products, and plan for major life events. And you'll walk away with the confidence you need to ensure that your money is always working as hard as you are. So turn to the nerds to answer your real-world money questions and get insights that can help you make the smartest financial decisions for your life. Listen to NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Shaler's brigade, on the extreme right of the Federal line, immediately collapsed in the face of the surprise Confederate assault. A few units in Seymour's brigade, the next in line, managed to form up, but quickly realized the futility of trying to make a stand under the circumstances. And so, in next to no time, the men of both brigades were in headlong retreat.
Truman Seymour and Alexander Shaler weren't present with their men when the Confederate attack erupted out of the woods. They were back at Sedgwick's headquarters on the Spotswood Road, personally making their reports about the day's activities.
The crash of gunfire to the north sent the 2 brigadiers racing to mount their horses, and then they spurred off to see what was happening. Each quickly realized that a complete rout was in progress, and each did what he could to stop it. Uncle John Sedgwick was there too, shouting, "Halt! For God's sake, boys! Rally!" Well, Sedgwick then remembered that a corps commander's job was to marshal reinforcements to deal with the enemy attack, and so he rode off to get them. Meanwhile, Shaler sat atop his horse on a wagon track that cut through the woods and that offered an obvious rally point. He pleaded, "For God's sake, men, make a stand on this road. If you think anything of the Army of the Potomac, make a stand here." But his words had little effect on the Union soldiers streaming past him. Within minutes, Confederates with raised muskets surrounded him and demanded his surrender. Shaler was taken prisoner, and so, as it turned out, was Seymour.
It was a dramatic Confederate triumph, but it was made too late in the day and with too few troops to have little real impact on the overall state of affairs.
Gordon's brigade did most of the damage. Neither Johnston nor Hoffman hit the enemy flank squarely. It was just too difficult for the Confederates to maintain an accurate orientation in the dense woods and deepening twilight. Meanwhile, on the Federal side, Sedgwick successfully rounded up and positioned troops to shore up his threatened flank.
John B. Gordon, trying to capitalize on the initial Confederate success, made a second attack around 10 p.m., but it got nowhere. For the rest of his life, Gordon blamed Early and Ewell for not letting him attack sooner on May 6th. He insisted that, quote, had it been made at an early hour in the day, instead of at sundown, the 6th of May would have ended in the crushing defeat of General Grant's army.
Despite Gordon's assertion, in reality, no matter when the attack was made, it wouldn't have led to the crushing defeat of General Grant's army. A 3-brigade assault was simply too weak to achieve such a result, and besides, twilight actually assisted the attack by concealing the rebels' approach, increasing the element of surprise, and obscuring the Confederates' numbers. And so an attack earlier in the day might well have achieved less success, or even failed outright.
Nevertheless, for some Federals, after a day of hard fighting on both the Orange Turnpike and Orange Plank Road sectors of the battlefield, the unpleasant surprise of Gordon's attack late on May 6th seemed to indicate the rebels now firmly held the upper hand.
One general rushed to Ulysses S. Grant and declared that, quote, "This is a crisis that cannot be looked upon too seriously. I know Lee's methods well by past experience. He will throw his whole army between us and the Rapidan and cut us off completely from our communications."
Grant's reply became famous, quote, "Oh, I am heartily tired of hearing about what Lee is going to do. Some of you always seem to think he is suddenly going to turn a double somersault and land in our rear and on both of our flanks at the same time. Go back to your command and try to think what we are going to do ourselves instead of what Lee is going to do."
The next morning, Grant assessed the situation. The ferocity of the clash in the wilderness was worse than anything in his experience, even the awful fight at Shiloh 2 years before. In fact, he was surprised the enemy still remained on the field, and he told another officer that in the Western Theater, any Confederate general, quote, would have retreated after 2 days of such punishment.
But nonetheless, Grant saw the battle as a draw, saying, quote, "We can claim no victory over the enemy. Neither have they gained a single advantage."
The question now before Grant was whether to renew the fight here or maneuver around Lee's flank and try to best him somewhere else. Renewing the fight here held little appeal. With the Confederates solidly posted behind field works, a fresh attack promised little but additional carnage. That left the second option, and Grant quickly made up his mind to disengage the Army of the Potomac and send it slanting off to the southeast, around Lee's right flank. Accordingly, at 6:30 on the morning of May 7th, he wrote new orders for George Meade. Quote, make all preparations for a night march to take position at Spotsylvania Courthouse.
That day, Theodore Lyman saw Grant under a pine tree, puffing on a pipe. He heard Grant predict, "Tonight, Lee will be retreating south."
Like many in the Army of the Potomac, Lyman believed Grant still underestimated his adversary. In a letter to his parents, Lyman imagined himself responding, "Ah, General, Robert E. Lee is not John Pemberton. He will retreat south, but only far enough to get across your path, and then he will retreat no more."
Pemberton, of course, was Grant's opponent at Vicksburg. In any case, Lyman's fictional reply to Grant's prediction, while imaginary, nevertheless accurately reflected the awe in which most of the Army's officers and soldiers held Robert E. Lee.
But those same Federals were also starting to learn something about Ulysses S. Grant. In previous years, after an inconclusive clash like the just concluded battles there in the wilderness, well, the campaign would be over, and they would withdraw, back the way they'd come. And they had little reason to expect that this time it would be any different. But then they spotted Grant. He went by, riding with his staff along the Brock Road, past Hancock's field works, and everyone saw it. Grant was riding south. Everyone instantly knew what that meant. The Army wasn't retreating, but would continue going after the rebels. At that realization, men started to cheer, and others took it up, until all along the road, soldiers were hollering at the top of their lungs and lighting pine knots to illuminate the dark road through the dark forest for Grant and his staff. The general-in-chief, who considered the demonstration, quote-unquote, most unfortunate, because it might give away the Army's movement, told aides to shush the men. But the cheers didn't finally subside until Grant was out of sight.
That means it's time for this episode's book recommendation. And our recommendation this time is Bloody Roads South, The Wilderness to Cold Harbor, May and June 1864, by Noah Andre Trudeau.
You can find a list of all of our book recommendations at the podcast website, which is www.civilwarpodcast.org. Also at the website, you can find information about joining the Strawfoot Brigade and supporting the podcast in that way, just like John L., Eero B., Gradient, and Andy S.
And Travis P., Timothy E., and Clark.
We also want to say thank you to Stephen M. for his donation. And then thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Tracy and I do hope that you join us again next time, but until then, take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.